The knife was wrong. Security Chief Orenvel registered this before she registered anything else. Before the intruder's position, before the threat geometry, before the Queen's stillness at the center of the throne room. The knife was wrong because it was visible. Every serious threat assessment Orenvel had conducted in 14 years of royal protection work had taught her that the weapon you see is not the weapon that kills you. Visible weapons were statements. Negotiating tools. The architecture of someone who wants a conversation before an ending. The person holding it to Queen Saravel's throat was not someone Orenvel recognized, which was itself a failure she would process later. Right now she was processing the room. 12 meters between her position at the door and the Queen's position at the throne. For security personnel already present, all frozen in the specific paralysis of trained officers who have a clear target and a hostage between them and it. One intruder. One blade. And the Queen's human guard, standing 2 meters to Saravel's right. He was smiling. Not the performance of a man trying to project calm. Not the controlled expression of a trained security professional managing his response under pressure. An actual smile, small and private, the kind that appears on a person's face when something has happened that they recognize, and the recognition is, for reasons no one else in the room understands, a relief. Orenvel had been watching Kale Darrow for 6 months. She had read his file, conducted his clearance evaluation, observed his integration into the royal protection detail with the careful professional attention of a chief who needed to understand every variable in her security architecture. She had not, in 6 months, seen him smile. She had also not, in 6 months, understood why the Queen had requested him specifically. She had 3 active mysteries in the next 12 seconds and no time to resolve any of them. She took a step into the room and the intruder's eyes moved to her, and the blade pressed closer, and Queen Saravel said, in the calm register of someone who has assessed the situation and reached a conclusion, "Oren, stop." Orenvel stopped. "Everyone stop," the Queen said. "All of you." The 4 security personnel didn't move. They were already frozen. Orenvel was the only one who had been moving, and she had stopped. The room achieved the particular stillness of 11 bodies and 1 active threat, and the Queen spoke again, to no one Orenvel could identify. "Now," the Queen said, and Kale Darrow moved. He had been standing 2 meters to the Queen's right, which was not his assigned position. His assigned position was 4 meters to her left, near the throne's secondary approach corridor. He had moved at some point before Orenvel entered, repositioning without her noticing, without anyone noticing, and she added this to the list of things she was going to need to understand. What he did in the next 4 seconds was difficult to describe accurately, and Orenvel would spend time afterward reviewing the throne room's monitoring footage to make sure she had seen what she thought she had seen. He moved toward the intruder. Not around. Not at an angle. Directly toward, which was the direction that the blade was oriented, which was the direction that every protective protocol she had ever trained under said you did not move. He moved toward the blade and toward the hostage and toward the intruder simultaneously, and he covered the 2 meters in the kind of time that people cover 2 meters when they have decided to cover it and have made that decision before they moved, and what happened in the contact was something the monitoring footage would later show in frame-by-frame detail that Orenvel still found difficult to follow even when it was slowed to 1/10 speed. The intruder was not slow. The intruder was not untrained. The blade moved, and Kale Darrow was somewhere else when it arrived at where he had been, and the Queen was out of the blade's reach, and the intruder was not standing anymore. For seconds, Orenvel crossed the room. Her security team crossed the room. The intruder was restrained before they arrived, because Kale Darrow had done that too, and he was standing over the restrained intruder with his hands loose at his sides and his breathing slightly elevated, which was the only physical evidence that anything effortful had occurred. He looked at Orenvel. The smile was gone. What replaced it was the expression she had been seeing for 6 months. Attentive, measured, giving away very little. "Are you injured?" she said. To him, first, which she noted as an automatic response she would also need to examine later. "No," he said. She turned to the Queen. "Your Majesty." "I'm fine," the Queen said. She was straightening her formal garments with the composed attention of someone who has been briefly inconvenienced and is not prepared to grant the inconvenience more significance than it deserves. The intruder should be taken to the secondary holding facility, not the primary. She paused. I want to speak with them before the formal inquiry begins. This was also not protocol. Orenvel filed it alongside the smile and the repositioning and the direct approach toward the blade, and she had her team take the intruder out, and she waited until the room had cleared enough for the conversation she needed to have. Kale, she said. He looked at her. The repositioning, she said. Before I entered, you moved from your assigned station. Yes, he said. When? When the intruder entered through the Eastern Service corridor, he said. Approximately 40 seconds before you came through the main door. She processed this. You saw the intruder enter. I heard the corridor's secondary pressure seal re-engage, he said. The service corridor's primary seal is maintained at a different pressure than the secondary. When someone passes through and the secondary re-engages, the pressure differential produces a sound that's outside the room's normal acoustic range but not outside mine. Orenvel looked at him. You heard a pressure differential. Yes. Through a sealed door. The room's acoustic dampening is calibrated for the primary frequency ranges of thoraly and serenthi hearing, he said. The calibration creates a narrow gap in the mid-upper range. The pressure differential falls in that gap. She stood with this for a moment. You've been mapping the room's acoustic gaps. Since week 2, he said. Why didn't you tell me? He looked at her with the expression she had been cataloging for 6 months, the one that gave away very little. You didn't ask, he said. This was technically true and practically maddening, and she filed it for later because there was a more urgent question. The smile, she said. When I came in, you were smiling. Something shifted in his expression. Not much. Enough to tell her the answer mattered to him differently than the other answers had. The intruder used a Vethran pattern blade, he said. Custom grip modification for a right-handed draw across the body, which means the natural line of force for a controlled hostage situation runs across the target's left side. He paused. The queen is left-handed. Her natural response to a threat on her left side is to move right. The intruder positioned the blade assuming a right-handed target's instinctive flinch response. He paused again. They had studied the queen's public profile. They hadn't studied her actual habits. And you had, Orenvel said. It was my job to, he said. The smile, she said again. A very brief pause. Because I knew, when I saw the position, that the threat geometry was solvable, he said. I'd been running the room's possible scenarios for 6 months. This one was one I'd prepared for. He looked at her steadily. I smiled because I wasn't improvising. The formal inquiry into the assassination attempt took 3 days. Orenvel ran it with the thoroughness that the situation required and the additional attention that the situation had generated in her because the situation had revealed several things about her own security architecture that she had not known needed to be examined. She interviewed every security team member. She reviewed all available surveillance. She compiled the acoustic mapping data that Kale Darrow submitted at her request, 47 pages of frequency analysis of every room in the Queen's residential and formal spaces, conducted quietly, documented thoroughly, never mentioned until asked. On the 3rd day, she requested a meeting with the Queen. She had been requesting this meeting for 6 months and it had been consistently rescheduled. It was granted within 2 hours of her 3rd day request, which told her that the Queen had also been thinking about the 3 days and had decided that the conversation was now appropriate. Queen Saravel received her in the private consultation room rather than the formal audience chamber, which was itself a signal about the nature of the conversation the Queen expected. The Queen was seated rather than standing and had dismissed her attendants, and she looked at Orenvel with the specific quality of attention that Orenvel had observed, in 6 months of close proximity, was how the Queen looked at things she was genuinely interested in rather than things she was managing. You want to know why I requested him, the Queen said. I want to know why you requested him, Orenvel confirmed. Sit down, the Queen said. Orenvel sat. 3 years ago, the Queen said, I attended a diplomatic reception at Vethra Station. You were not part of the security detail at that time. You were assigned to the Southern Territorial Office. The detail was led by Commander Rethvor. She paused. At the reception, a dispute arose between two attendees that escalated to a physical altercation in the main hall. The detail responded appropriately. The altercation was contained. Orenvel knew the incident report. She had read it during her transition briefing. What the incident report does not contain, the Queen said, is what I observed in the 40 seconds before the detail responded. She paused. There was a human attendant at the reception. Not in a security role, he was part of the diplomatic support staff for the human delegation. When the dispute began to escalate, before it became a physical altercation, before any of the detail's 12 trained security personnel had registered it as a threat, this person moved. Quietly. To a position that, I realized afterward, would have allowed him to intervene in any of the 4 most likely escalation paths. She looked at Orenvel. He was in the right place before anyone else knew there was a right place to be. Orenvel sat with this. You identified him as a security asset from an informal observation at a reception. I identified him as someone who thinks about rooms, the Queen said. There is a difference between a trained security professional who responds to threats and a person who has spent so long understanding how situations develop that they are already in position before the situation has decided what it is. She paused. The former is what I have 12 of. The latter is considerably rarer. And you requested him specifically. I requested a consultation with the human diplomatic delegation about augmenting my personal detail with a human security specialist, the Queen said. They offered several candidates. I asked if the attendant from the Vethra reception was available. The pause. He was. He had, apparently, been working in various support roles since the reception. Not in security. In logistics. He was in logistics, Orenvel said. He requested the logistics assignment, the Queen said. His explanation when the delegation asked why he wanted to leave a security track career for logistics was that logistics required understanding how everything in a large system connected to everything else, and that this was something he wanted to understand better. She looked at Orenvel. He spent 3 years in logistics. Learning how systems connect. Orenvel thought about 47 pages of acoustic frequency analysis. She thought about pressure differentials heard through sealed doors. She thought about a man who had spent 6 months in the Queen's security detail and had, in that time, mapped every acoustic gap in every room the Queen occupied. He was learning the whole time, she said. He is always learning the whole time, the Queen said. That is what I observed at the Vethra reception. Not a reaction. A preparation. She paused. The question I have been waiting for you to ask me, Oren, is not why I requested him. You have understood that since the throne room. The question you actually want to ask is different. Orenvel looked at her. Why didn't I tell you? The Queen said. Why didn't you tell me? Orenvel confirmed. The Queen was quiet for a moment. The quality of her silence was the quality of someone choosing the honest answer rather than the diplomatic one. Because I needed to know what you would observe on your own, she said. About him. And about your own security architecture. She paused. The acoustic mapping he produced was information your security system should have had. He gathered it in 6 months without being asked. The question that document raises is not about his capability. It is about why 12 trained professionals had been in those rooms for years and had not gathered it. The quiet in the consultation room had the weight of an honest assessment arriving in a space that had been waiting for it. The assassination attempt, Orenvel said. The timing. 3 days into his formal integration with the detail. Yes, the Queen said. You knew it was coming. I knew the threat environment had changed in the last month, the Queen said. I did not know the specific timing. I knew the probability was elevated. She paused. I told Kale Darrow 2 weeks ago that the threat assessment had changed and I asked him to treat the detail's standard operational parameters as insufficient. You briefed him separately, Orenvel said. Without briefing me. I briefed the person best positioned to act on the information in the way the information required, the Queen said. Not apologetically. with the direct clarity of someone who has made a considered decision and owns it. The standard operational parameters are your domain, Oren. The space between the parameters and what the parameters don't cover is where he operates. She paused. I needed both. Orenvel sat with the full picture for a moment. She had been doing this job for 14 years with the professional pride of someone who is genuinely good at it. She was good at it. She was thorough and she was disciplined, and she ran a security detail that had not had a breach in 4 years. She had read Kale Darrow's file and found it unremarkable and had conducted his clearance and integrated him into her rotation and had watched him for 6 months and had understood, she had believed, what she was looking at. She had been looking at the wrong thing. She had been looking at his capability, at what he could do in a moment of threat. She had not been looking at the 6 months of quiet, patient, systematic preparation that made the moment of threat solvable before it arrived. She had not been looking at the logistics career that was actually 3 years of learning how systems connect. She had not been looking at the 47 pages that no one had asked for and that had been quietly accumulating since week 2. He's been doing this his whole career, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a realization arriving in real time. The human delegation's briefing material on him is interesting, the Queen said. His formal record shows a series of what appear to be lateral career moves, security to logistics to training to support roles and back again. Each move apparently inexplicable in terms of conventional career advancement. She paused. Each move, in retrospect, into a position that gave him access to a different part of a large systems architecture. He's been building a map, Orenvel said. The whole time. Of everything, the Queen said. Systems, connections, the spaces where prepared attention can accomplish what reactive response cannot. She looked at Orenvel. He is not what I brought him here to be. He is what he has always been. I brought him here because what he is was useful here. The intruder's identity and origin took 2 weeks to fully establish, and what the investigation revealed was the third thing that changed Orenvel's understanding of the throne room and the 6 months preceding it. The intruder was affiliated with a political faction that had been active in the Queen's territory for approximately 18 months, conducting escalating destabilization operations that the security apparatus had been tracking with the attention of a body that knows a threat exists and is working to localize it. The faction's operations had been sophisticated, patient, difficult to trace precisely because they operated in the spaces between obvious threat indicators, in the gaps of a detection system calibrated for different patterns. Orenvel brought this to Kale Darrow's attention during a security briefing on the investigation's findings. He looked at the faction's operational map, 14 months of documented activity across the Queen's territorial administration, and he was quiet for approximately 3 minutes. Long enough that the other 2 security analysts in the briefing room shifted in their seats. He was not looking at the map the way the analysts had been looking at it, which was with the focused attention of trained professionals identifying threat nodes and response requirements. He was looking at it the way he had been looking at rooms for 6 months. The gaps are designed, he said. Designed, Orenvel said. The pattern isn't random, he said. Every operation that left a trace left it in a predictable place. The kind of place a well-calibrated detection system looks. The operations that didn't leave traces, he touched 3 unmarked positions on the map, locations where no documented activity had occurred. These are where the actual infrastructure is. The analysts looked at each other. Those are clean zones, the senior analyst said. No recorded activity. No detected activity, Kale Darrow said. Recorded and detected are different things. He looked at the 3 positions on the map. Your detection system was calibrated to look for a pattern. They operated outside the pattern. The clean zones are where they operated outside it. That's a theory, the senior analyst said, with the careful professional skepticism of someone whose job requires evidence. Yes, Kale Darrow said. Run surveillance on the 3 positions for 2 weeks and see what the evidence says. 2 weeks later, the evidence said he was right. All 3 positions contained infrastructure belonging to the faction, operating in plain view of a detection system that had been looking in the right direction and the wrong places simultaneously. The discovery produced a chain of investigative leads that dismantled 3/4 of the faction's territorial network within 6 weeks. Orenvel sat across from Kale Darrow in her office after the 6th week's report came through, and she asked him the question she had been building toward since the consultation room. The faction's operational pattern, she said. The gap exploitation. The calibration strategy. She paused. You recognized it immediately. Not because you'd seen it before. He waited. Because you used the same approach, she said. He looked at her steadily. The acoustic gaps in the throne room, she said. The positioning before the threat arrived. The logistics career and the training rotations and the 17 different roles across your file that never looked like advancement and were actually, she stopped. You operate in the gaps of what people are looking for. Not to evade detection. To be where you need to be before detection is relevant. It's effective, he said. The faction learned it from somewhere, she said. Or developed it independently. Or, she stopped again because the next part of the sentence was uncomfortable and needed to be said anyway. Or the same insight that makes you effective at protection also makes someone with different intentions effective at threat. The gap-based approach isn't a human capability. It's a method. And methods don't belong to sides. He was quiet for a moment. It was the longest pause she had seen from him since the throne room. Yes, he said. That's correct. Does that bother you? She said. Another pause. Honest. Yes, he said. It bothers me a great deal. He looked at her. I've been thinking about it since I identified the gaps in the faction's pattern. About the fact that the same quality of attention that makes me useful here can be turned towards something that harms here. He paused. I don't have a resolution for that. I just have what I do with it. What do you do with it? She said. I choose the side carefully, he said. And I stay. The Queen's formal security review, conducted 8 weeks after the assassination attempt, produced a restructured protection architecture that Orenvel designed with Kale Darrow's input across a series of working sessions that were, she found, among the most productive professional conversations of her 14-year career. He did not design the architecture. He contributed to it in the specific way of someone who understands the gaps and can tell you where the gaps are, and the understanding of where the gaps are is what makes the architecture better. The final document was 43 pages. It included, as an appendix, the original 47 pages of acoustic frequency analysis. Not as a security document. As a methodology illustration. As a demonstration of what 6 months of systematic, patient, unsolicited attention to a system's infrastructure could produce, and as an implicit question to every security professional who read it. What did you have in your space for years that you hadn't mapped yet? The Queen reviewed the final document in Orenvel's presence and read the appendix with the focused attention she gave things she found genuinely interesting. He mapped the gaps, she said. He maps everything, Orenvel said. Is it learned or innate? Orenvel thought about the logistics career. The training rotations. The 17 roles. The smile in the throne room when the threat geometry resolved into something recognizable. She thought about a man who had spent his entire career moving through systems and learning how they connected, quietly and thoroughly and without needing anyone to ask him to. I don't think he knows the difference, she said. I don't think he ever separated the question from the habit. She paused. He's been doing it for so long that the doing of it is just how he moves through the world. The Queen set the document down. She looked at the appendix's first page. The Vethra reception, she said. 3 years ago. When I saw him position himself before the altercation had decided what it was. She paused. I watched him for 11 minutes before I understood what I was seeing. I thought at first that he was nervous. Moving frequently, adjusting his position, tracking the room with more attention than a support staff member typically applied. She paused again. Then I understood. He wasn't nervous. He was computing. The whole time. He's always computing, Orenvel said. Yes. The Queen was quiet for a moment. I want you to ask him something. On my behalf. Ask him yourself, Orenvel said. And then, aware of the presumption, if you're willing. I think he'd answer you more honestly than he'd answer me. The Queen's meeting with Kale Darrow was private. Orenvel did not know what was said. What she knew was the outcome, which was that Kale Darrow's assignment was extended indefinitely, and that a second human security specialist was requested from the diplomatic delegation, and that the request specified a candidate with an unusual career trajectory, and that the delegation's response had been to send 3 files and a note that said, "Asterisk, we have more of these than you might expect. We've just never been sure anyone was looking for them, asterisk." She read the note twice. She thought about the gaps. About the spaces between what detection systems are calibrated for and what actually operates there. About a career built from lateral moves that only looked lateral if you were looking at advancement rather than architecture. She thought about the Vethra reception 3 years ago, and a queen who had watched a man for 11 minutes and understood something that had taken Orenvel 6 months of proximity and a blade at the queen's throat to see. She thought about the note from the delegation. "We have more of these than you might expect." She thought about what that meant. Not for the royal protection detail. For everything else. For every system in the compact that was calibrated to look for a pattern, that was organized around a detection architecture built from accumulated experience of known threat types, that was thorough and disciplined and comprehensive and still had gaps in the mid-upper acoustic range that no one had mapped because no one had thought to map them. She thought about what it meant that there was a species that produced, apparently in some numbers, people who looked at systems the way Kale Darrow looked at rooms. Who moved through careers the way he moved through rooms. Who computed and prepared and positioned themselves before the situation had decided what it was, quietly and thoroughly, and who smiled, small and private, when the preparation resolved into a recognizable shape. Not because they wanted credit for the preparation. Because the preparation was the point. The outcome was just the evidence that the preparation had been correct. She thought about the faction's gap exploitation. About the same insight turned toward harm. About Kale Darrow sitting across from her saying, "Yes, it bothers me a great deal." She thought, "I choose the side carefully. And I stay." She thought that the staying was the thing. The preparation was remarkable. The positioning was extraordinary. The acoustic mapping and the logistics career and the 17 roles and the 47 pages, all of it was extraordinary in ways she was still mapping herself. But the staying, the choice, made carefully, to bring all of that attention and all of that patience and all of that systematic preparation to bear on the protection of something worth protecting, and then to remain, through 6 months of observation and 1 throne room and 8 weeks of security review and the long, difficult work of rebuilding a protection architecture to be less full of gaps. The staying was the part that none of the documentation captured. It wasn't in the file. It wasn't in the acoustic analysis or the faction map or the restructured protection document. It was just a fact about a person that you only learned by watching them remain. She had been watching for 6 months. She was starting, she thought, to understand what she was looking at. She approved the 3 candidate files from the delegation, requested interviews for all of them, and added a question to the interview protocol that had not been on the standard form before. It was a single question, added at the end, after all the formal assessment criteria. It said, "Asterisk, tell me about the last room you were in. What did you notice that wasn't obvious? Asterisk." She was curious what they would say. She suspected she already knew. And she suspected that knowing, the fact that she now knew what to look for, that she had learned to look for it from 6 months of proximity to someone who had never stopped looking, was itself a kind of preparation. The kind that had been quietly, patiently, without announcement, building the whole time. She left the question on the form. She sent the form to the delegation. She waited to see what came back, the way a person waits when they have learned, from someone who makes a practice of it, that the most important information often arrives in the space between what you were expecting